everyone. My name is Tina Ruggieri. I am the Assistant Curator at the Abrams Engel Institute for the Visual Arts, located at the University of Alabama at Birmingham's campus. I'm excited to be here today with artist Katelyn Ledford. Katelyn was born in 1994 in Austin, Texas. She currently lives and works in Boston, Massachusetts. She received her Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Alabama at Birmingham in 2017 and received her Master of Fine Arts in Painting at the Rhode Island School of Design in 2019. Katelyn references contemporary life and the way in which we all use modern technology to present our lives via social media as inspiration for her imagery and portraits. Her paintings are hyper-realistic while incorporating symbols and a variety of materials. Katelyn's interests in female portraits are aligned with the way in which we use technology and the mass consumption of images to change the perception of the modern woman. Katelyn has had exhibitions in galleries and museums such as the Baton Rouge Gallery, Abigail Ogilvy Gallery in Boston, Field Projects Gallery in New York City, the Wiregrass Museum of Art in Dothan, Alabama, and Moyen Row Gallery in New York City. Katelyn, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
So first, I just want to ask you, how did you become interested in art?
I think like a lot of other artists, I kind of just always grew up doodling and doing that kind of shtick of just practicing and like drawing images and celebrities and things like that. I moved to Alabama when I was young, so I spent most of my life in Alabama, and growing up in the suburbs, I didn't really grow up around contemporary art, so most of my knowledge and experience with art is basically just me like honing my skill and practicing photorealism as a kid and just kind of like recognizing like a skill that I could increase myself. So it was more like I was focused on craft than thinking about conceptually anything like that. So that's where like going to undergrad and then grad school was able to like make my mind explode and think about that so much more rather than like craft.
Yeah. And being up north, you're definitely exposed to a lot more than we are here. I mean, we have a handful of smaller galleries and we have a couple of institutions, but you're in Boston and so close to New York that I'm extremely jealous.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I love being up in the north for that reason, but at least being in the south, it really made me recognize the importance of like building a community, a strong community, to then even just talk about images you see online, or like connecting through social media with other artists across the world.
Definitely. And that's what I do. That's how I've gotten to know so many artists, is because of social media, and been able to keep up with people like you because of social media.
Yeah,
so exactly. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I wanted to start with your most recent show that you had at the Spring Break Art Show. Can you just tell us about this immersive environment and how you approach this installation?
Yeah, so it was a two-person booth through Abigail Ogilvy Gallery. It was with Marissa Aidsman. She made the videos and then the black and white paintings within it. But the wallpaper, where that came from was originally from my thesis show at RISD. And so that image came from me. I'd been creating this 3D model in my computer for about a whole semester, and I was making and rendering her kind of loosely based off of myself, and if I were to idealize my facial proportions, like things that I would want if I could like have that ability to give myself like plastic surgery. So like her eyebrows are a little thicker, her lips are a little bigger, nose is slightly smaller. So it was like those slight tweaks. So I kind of like to view her as like my fraternal twin a little bit, or like a child of some sort. But I was making her and I didn't even know like what I wanted to do with her, but it kind of just like, I was thinking so much about her. Like I gave her a pronoun, even though she didn't exist in physical reality. She only existed on the screen, but yet most of the time we only know people through screens now. Mm-hmm. And so I had this idea to use her image as a wallpaper. So then she became a decoration and a frame to my paintings. Mm-hmm. So then that she's kind of performing this role that women have in technology and the way they're kind of used in social media, being like these beautiful images to stare at. But I wanted to give her some agency, so that's why she's like staring out and gazing at the viewer. So from far away, she's pure decoration. She's a prop, but up close, kind of uncomfortable looking at her because you can't look away from her gaze at all whatsoever. And Abigail Ogilvy at Abigail Ogilvy Gallery was just, she loved it too. And she was so excited. She was like, this would be perfect for spring break, and thinking about the theme of in excess. Yeah. Because it's straight up excessive being a woman's face. You can't look away from her or ignore her. So that was a little bit about like the thinking behind like creating an immersive space without having to clutter it with a lot of things. That's also an investigation of like how much information do you need to make it feel like claustrophobic or a bit much without having so many things within it.
Yeah, that's what I love about Spring Break Art Show is that I've discovered a lot of artists because of that show, and it's really nice to see artists be able to explore their themes in an immersive environment and what that does to the viewer when you step into it. It's like you're playing with each other. And I think I described this with another artist as kind of like stepping into your mind a little bit as the artist when you're the viewer stepping into them. And so that's what I love about Spring Break and I love immersive environments, and it's really interesting to see artists create what they create with that.
I completely agree with that. Yes.
So these were in that same show, but so how do you incorporate both modern technologies while you were using hyperrealism painting techniques in your work? Like, how do you incorporate those two together?
Yeah. So I'll start off with like a little bit of my process to talk about kind of like the nitty gritty of it, and then talk about how like relate conceptually. So I always start out kind of with a digital collage sketch in Photoshop. And from like where I start in that, just like basic collage of images and other just like playing with brushes and distorting images, I will look at it, like project it on the canvas, and from there like things completely change, and it's continually going back and forth, and the end result is never like what the sketch actually started out as. So while I'm using modern technology to do sketching, I don't use a sketchbook to do like the traditional way of planning something out. I like to use the computer. Since I use imagery from the computer, it feels a little like derivative in a way that I don't need to be making my life more difficult by like drawing an image in my sketchbook to then do it back on the computer. So I'll play with it there. But when I'm making these images on the computer, I'm continually thinking about what materials need to happen. And like, when I just see the sketches within my computer, I think, well, these are boring. Like, these are definitely not interesting whatsoever. And so the exciting part comes when I'm able to put it on the canvas and create texture and play with materials and put embossing beneath it and kind of play with trompe l'oeil, so that it's always a back and forth play. So some days I'm spending time like rendering something hyper realistically from like staring at a computer screen, just meticulously doing that. And then other days I'm spending it like squeezing paint from the tube and playing with my airbrush and doing clumsy things, quote unquote. And so it's just a continual back and forth between like analog and modern technologies. So it's just like, it keeps my brain happy and excited to be like doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. You use it more as a tool, which kind of leads me to a question that I have for later on, but we can do it now, is your work is digitally driven. So you source from the internet, things like that, but you could easily only use just the software, such as Photoshop and Illustrator, and then produce those final works, either printing them from a printer or whatever. So why do you still choose to paint instead of digitally printing them out?
Yeah, I think really that question is like at the crux of my practice and like what I do and why I play with materials the way that I do, because I largely super believe in the physicality of paintings and the idea that they have to hold up in person as well and not exist just as a JPEG. And for me personally, I really believe that they can't just exist as a JPEG on like a tiny little screen or anything. And so the way that I can like play and push up against that, the idea of like, why can't these just be printed, is like I like to do adding in the like embossed like textural dot matrix beneath my painting, so they technically physically can't even be printed just because of everything that's on it. So then they can't even be pasted either, because then you just get a lot of weird bubbles and everything like that. But then at other times I do use other ways of like kind of tricking the viewer, making you think like, oh, she does know how to paint. She knows how to paint trompe l'oeil and create these weird effects. And then at those times using like resin to make something look like water because I can, and I don't have to paint each water droplet like wilted on the left, and I don't have to. I can use resin for that then and kind of like make the viewer a little frustrated in trying to figure out like what parts are physically real or not, especially when you're looking at it on an image online. So then when you do see it in person, it feels more rewarding when you're able to like, step around it and see how light like shifts the image, or whether or not like how things look physically real with a trompe-l'oeil effect of a bevel, how it's actually not just like it's a completely flat surface. So then it goes back to that conversation in painting too between image and then object making. So then they're kind of a play of both, whichever like network they want to exist in, whether it's like physical space or within like technology and online media.
Yeah. So interesting. I love it.
Yeah. It's a continual thought that I'm always thinking about and considering with each one. Because like while some don't have a lot of texture in them, I'm still thinking about like why this specific object needs to be rendered with my hand instead of printing it. So whether it's putting in my own style onto it or using a variety of materials to make it more 3D, then it's always coming back to that.
That makes sense. Can you tell us where you find your imagery and inspiration, and how does that imagery that you source inspire you?
Yeah, so I am a huge image hoarder. I think that most of my storage on my computer is spent from just collecting images and JPEGs. I find it seriously anywhere. And when I say that, you know, it can sound a little cliche, but it really is anywhere. Just like screenshots from advertisements on my phone. When I'm watching TV, sometimes I'll take pictures of the screen of what I'm watching on TV, or even just like my own moments in life, like things like that, or random text that I read. It's just a big like mishmash of it all. And then while some are like Google fever dreams, so it's just me going down the rabbit hole looking at like Google images because you know it'll give you a related image to a related image.
I've been there.
It's like such a fun rabbit hole time suck to go down. And I really am relying more on my gut now. I think I had a hard time trusting that early on in my career, was trusting my gut and what I wanted to do. And now more I'm trusting that gut when I'm looking at images and finding them and realizing like, I took a second longer to look at that image. I should save that. There was a reason that I just felt a little bit of a connection to it. And so while that's how I collect images, how I bring them together starts from like two different places. Sometimes I'll see an image and I'll be like, I know exactly how I want to use that. Like this painting behind me of Betty Draper. I saw that image of her from Mad Men and I was like, gotta use that. Betty is an iconic character for so many great reasons and problematic reasons. I had to use her image. While other times I will think of like this general idea or like statement, what I want the painting to be about in like reference to like my own experiences or other women's experiences. And then just like rifle through all my images and like pick and pull things from there to see like what fits, what doesn't. And then like once I have some basic bones of images, it's thinking about like what other like relational objects and elements can I put in that'll make like enhance that state a bit more, or kind of like push up against it and make you question it a little more.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you should always trust your gut. That is definitely something I've had to learn in my life and my career path, is that you always just have to trust your gut. And so, and the work will reflect that as you move forward.
It's hard when you're like type A person to trust your gut and realize that it's okay.
Trust me. I totally get that. And so I want to come to this. So since you are a UAB grad, many of our viewers are going to probably remember your show at AEIVA, your BFA show from AEIVA. How has your work changed since graduating?
So I think what people would say is like, oh, it's dramatically changed. But in my mind, it kind of makes sense. So while how it actually looks and manifests my paintings, they look completely different. But I think the core of the subject matter is still the same. I'm still concerned with portraiture. I'm still concerned with how people are represented. That's like followed me throughout my whole life. My mom was and is a portrait photographer. And so I'm always growing up. I grew up with around random strangers and looking at other people's faces. So I think that's kind of ingrained in the way I see images of people, that I'm just like, I'm so attracted to just that image of them. And then now I'm more concerned of like, is that even them? Who are they? And why does it matter? Their likeness to who they are. So from UAB and where I was and thinking more specifically about who this specific person was, now I'm more concerned about like the universal idea of what a portrait is, like, and what is this portrait of women in technology. So I'm no longer just specifically tied to an image or a photograph that I took. I'm mining my own life and other people's digital lives to like create these deconstructed portraits of the like what I call the personless portrait. So I couldn't make a painting and be like, that's Tina, but take parts from your life and my life and create a larger portrait from that. Yeah.
Makes complete sense. And then, so you've also used your own image a lot in your work, you know, previous, and I know it still comes up. So like the one on the left is more of a liking to you. And then, let me go. And then in this, you kind of see yourself sneaking up in the bottom. And so, how did you evolve to expand using your self-portrait, but also incorporating strangers? Like, how did this evolution happen?
Yeah, so I started with myself just from the plain and simple fear that like I have complete control and agency over my own image. I can represent myself however I look. I'm not embarrassed to paint myself making a horrible crying face. And so then that's where that kind of stemmed from using myself. But it was stepping stones to get to feeling comfortable using other people's images that I find online. Because at first I thought, like, ethically, is that okay that I'm taking someone else's image and using it? And by using another woman's image, am I contributing to like society's overuse of like sexualizing women and portraying them in this unflattering way and not letting them control their narrative? I was conflicted in those, like all of those feelings, and then decided just to take the plunge and realize like I am using these for what I hope is an extended purpose of bringing to light all of these issues. But it's something I'm very much so concerned with. Like, am I just contributing to this cynicism? Or am I helping like bring it forward a little more? And then that's why I also like to use like contemporary pop culture images, like memes and everything, because they are so overloaded with meaning behind them that they're perfect for the picking and putting them in paintings. But I still use myself because I am consider myself like an actor in the painting, and I can take on these roles and fulfill that and kind of like poke fun at myself while still not completely like stepping the boundaries of poking fun at somebody that I just feel like it's stepping over the line and I am not helping women in technology at all. So it's a continual back and forth, and I'm always questioning it.
I understand that. So we've talked about your digital references, but you also have in your work references to art history. Why are these references important?
So I reference art history a lot for like multiple reasons, of course. So I like to juxtapose art history versus, like I said, like current pop culture references because of the similarities and differences between like our time period now and our time period then and their treatment of women. I think we like to think we're like really high and mighty in how we treat women and how we portray them and act with them, especially in technology. But personally, I really don't think we're any different. We are still people treating women badly and abusing their images. And that's what they were doing back then as well. Women were muses to just paint from, and they were like the Mona Lisa. They were stoic and they're not showing any emotion. And that's kind of how we treat women now in technology. We're like, show some emotion, but not too much. And you better make it more authentic, but don't make it too authentic because I really don't want to see that much. I just want a little bit that's digestible. And so it's just, I just see this strange similarity between now and then especially since we all are kind of like, the way that they're painted, like Dutch masters, they're so beautiful. We love it. We love staring at them even now. I think anybody can get behind one of like the old master paintings and think that they're beautiful, even if they don't know contemporary art. And so then that's why I want to use those, because it kind of gives even like the person who isn't in the contemporary art world, they can step into it and like think about these things too, without knowing so much of the backstory and context. Like you can easily identify in things that like, so a child is crying. So for example, and get a load of this hot mess. Like you can see that with your eyes. You don't have to know that Rembrandt painted that to know like and figure out what's going on within it. So it's just kind of like always a back and forth between finding images. And sometimes I'll find those related images from other ones that I find that pull up historic paintings. And so I think that's funny too. Those come up in like images.
When you're Google diving, it's interesting sometimes the related images that come up based on what you're looking at, because at face value, sometimes I'm thinking, Google, you have no idea what I'm looking at. But then sometimes it is relevant.
Exactly. It's just so funny how like AI technology is guessing us and not getting it right.
Exactly. For my final question, so for the Housewives painting, I just wanted to ask if you could describe your contribution to that of the female portrait.
Yeah, so like some of the things I've said earlier, I'm really concerned with the idea of like a deconstructed portrait that talks about like how women interact with technology now and social media, and how also the viewer and audience interacts with them and portrays them. I'm interested in how like viral images like of Kim Kardashian crying all of a sudden doesn't even matter, that we don't even think potentially like, does that bother Kim at all? Does that make her sad? Or does she enjoy it, want to use it then to create products from and sell them? So it's like this strange shifting back and forth of like celebrity culture versus the average woman. And then also like the hot babe and all of those different ways that we kind of manifest ourselves in these curated profiles we create online. And I'm always considering it like, how authentic is ourselves online? At times, I think even now, especially since most of us are having to spend most of our lives online and through social media to interact with others, our digital presence is more ourselves than sometimes even our physical bodies are in the way we interact with the physical realm.
Yeah.
And so that kind of like theory and thinking about all of those things is how I like fuel the images that I take. So I want like these female portraits to, each one like kind of centers around like an experience or an observation of that. So while like Housewives is a consideration of my obsession, I know a lot of people's, the Real Housewives of insert city. And so I was taking the idea of the Real Housewives of New York, who used the symbol of the apple. And I remember seeing the opening shot of them holding the apple and thinking, that really looks like the story of Adam and Eve in all of those paintings. I wonder if the creators thought about that whatsoever. And even in my own mind, considering those relationship things of, were they unintentionally trying to talk about those things or not?
Yeah.
And then, so while this is more of like a critique on like, what is the housewife, and especially a housewife that's portrayed in reality TV and just showing these women as being drama filled, when I'm sure that they do have some redeeming qualities to them, they are not portrayed as such whatsoever. So it's kind of like using humor and absurdity to talk about the female portrait and like who we are or what we aren't and how we're portrayed, and using like humor and the absurdity to like bring people in, see what's going on, and kind of stay for a moment and think like, oh, this is a little critical, and oh, is that okay that I'm thinking that about that? Or like, wow, that's a little gruesome. That's not the best to look at. Or like the texture in that kind of looks a little, ooh, like I don't like that texture. All of those types of things. So it's like bringing you in with humor and then making you stay with like critical thinking, or like leaving a sour taste in your mouth to think about later, so that you can't just like look at this image of a woman and then consume her and then toss her away. I want these paintings of women and about women to like make a lasting impression that maybe you'll think about later.
Mm-hmm. And every time I look at your paintings, especially ones that are really worked like this one, each time I look at it, I see a different layer. And sometimes it makes me laugh. Sometimes it makes me really uncomfortable. And that is completely your point. And so,
yeah. That's exactly it. And that's what I want people to like have the experience with in seeing it online versus seeing it in person, but then realizing that most people won't see it in person. So it still needs to have some part of it hold up in seeing it online.
Yeah. And I think a lot of artists are grappling with that today. How does my work hold up both in a digital context, but also can translate to the real world? And, you know, how can that work in between both platforms, which can be very difficult. Some work, it does not look good in a picture, and some work, it only looks good in a picture. So how do you make it both?
That's exactly it. I don't think anyone even has the answer to it completely, but I think that's what makes like exciting contemporary artists right now, that's what makes them so exciting, is that they're trying to figure that out and they're playing around with it, and they're not just saying like, oh yeah, you can't see it in person, that's fine, whatever, like I don't care. They're like continually questioning that and like evolving with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today about your work. I really have enjoyed watching you progress over the last couple of years, and I can't wait to see more of your work in the future.
Thank you so much, Tina. I love this, and I love being able to work with Ava again. So fun.